The Injustice. Chapter 1. The Broken Scales.
Dust of the arena floor had settled, but the air inside the barracks of the Praetorian Guard still smelled of hot iron, sweat, and spilled blood. Outside the narrow stone window, the citizens of Rome were celebrating, their roars of excitement echoing through the grand boulevards of the capital. Lucius sat on a low wooden bench, his hands raw and blood-stained as he unwrapped the leather bindings from his forearms. He was 40 winters old, a legendary centurion who had spilled his blood in the frozen forests of Germania and the burning sands of Parthia to protect the empire's borders. He was a man who lived by a strict, unyielding code of duty and honor. Yet tonight, his eyes were burning with a deep, volatile fury that threatened to shatter his decades of military discipline. Just an hour ago, the emperor had awarded the grand military triumph and a massive estate of fertile land to a young, cowardly patrician named Gaius, a man who had never held a gladius in battle, but who happened to be the nephew of the chief senator. Lucius, who had actually led the vanguard and lost 30 of his finest men to secure that very victory, was given nothing but a cheap bronze medal and a cold order to return to his barracks. "It is an abomination," Lucius hissed into the dim light of the room, his jaw locked so tightly his muscles trembled. 30 of my men are rotting in the mud of the border river. I gave my youth, my blood, and my brothers to this empire. And for what? So a perfumed boy can ride in a golden chariot and laugh at our scars. The world is corrupt. The gods are blind. There is no justice under the sun. He was drowning in a swamp of resentment. He wasn't fighting the enemies of Rome tonight. He was fighting reality itself. He was letting the unfairness of the Senate poison his spirit, turning his glorious record into a bitter curse, completely blind to the fact that his rage was doing more damage to his soul than any Parthian arrow ever could. From the shadow near the iron armor racks stood Rusticus. He was an old, retired camp prefect whose legs had been shattered by a war wagon 20 years ago. He walked with a heavy wooden staff, his posture slow but completely unshakable, his face weathered like the stone walls of a frontier fort. He had been quietly watching Lucius curse the ceiling for an hour. "The Senate did not promise you a fair ledger when you took the oath, centurion," Rusticus said, his voice deep, slow, and heavy like a rolling boulder. "You are screaming at the wind because it blows south when you wanted to sail north. You call it a cosmic crime, but I see a man who is throwing a tantrum because the world refuses to follow his private script." Lucius sprang to his feet, his iron greaves clanking violently against the stone floor. "A script. This is about right and wrong, prefect. I earned that triumph. Gaius stole it through corruption. If a soldier cannot expect fairness for his blood, then the entire universe is nothing but a chaotic slaughterhouse." Rusticus set his wooden staff firmly against the stone floor, a sharp, echoing sound that instantly arrested Lucius's forward momentum. "The universe is an ocean, Lucius," the old veteran murmured, his eyes steady under his heavy gray brows. "It moves according to its own massive tides, not your expectations. You believe you are a victim of injustice, but you are actually a victim of your own arrogant trade. You gave your virtue to the battle, but you wanted the world to pay you back in land and gold. And now that the world has paid someone else, you are ready to throw away your honor in the mud."
Chapter 2. The Imperial Contract.
Lucius turned his back to the old man, staring out the narrow window at the glowing torches of the palace. "I do not seek luxury, Rusticus. I seek what is due. A good man should be rewarded, and a bad man should be punished. That is the natural law. That is a human desire, not a cosmic guarantee," Rusticus replied, walking slowly toward the center of the room. He reached down to a small wooden table and picked up a plain iron cestus, a common coin used to buy bread in the markets. He dropped it onto the floorboards between them. "Pick it up, Lucius," the old prefect ordered softly. Lucius frowned, but stepped forward and retrieved the small piece of iron from the dirt. "Tell me, Lucius," Rusticus said, his eyes locking onto Lucius's restless gaze. "When you go down to the harbor tomorrow and hand that iron coin to a fisherman, what do you expect him to give you in return? Do you expect him to hand you a fine Persian stallion, or a crate of rare silk?" "Of course not," Lucius muttered. "I expect a basket of fish. That is the exchange value of the coin." "Exactly." Rusticus nodded, his voice dropping into that deep, heavy, clinical clarity of the inner citadel. Every action in this world has its own specific currency. When Gaius and his family spent 20 years flattering senators, writing gold bribes, and playing the corrupt games of the court, they were spending a specific currency. The reward for that currency is a golden chariot and an estate from a corrupt emperor. They bought what they paid for. But you spent your currency in the mud of Germania. You paid in courage, in duty, and in the protection of your men. The reward for that currency is an unshakable character, a clean conscience, and the knowledge that you stood like a wall when the empire needed a man. You received your basket of fish. But now you are weeping because the emperor didn't give you a stallion. Rusticus stepped closer, his presence unyielding like the stone pillars around them. The Stoic sages taught us that the feeling of being wronged is the ultimate delusion of a soft mind. You believe that, because you are a good soldier, the external world owes you a reward. But virtue is its own reward, Lucius. The moment you demand a prize from the world for being honorable, your honor becomes a cheap trade commodity. You are acting as if you were a mercenary, not a Stoic.
Chapter 3. The Anatomy of the Scale.
Rusticus pulled a small piece of red chalk from his leather pouch and drew a single vertical line down the center of Lucius's iron shield, which was resting against the bench. "The world is split into two distinct realms, centurion," Rusticus said, tapping the left side of the shield. "On this side are the external outcomes. The decisions of the emperor, the distribution of land, the distribution of wealth, and the opinions of the Senate. This space is completely outside your control. It belongs to fortune, to chaos, and to the shifting winds of human corruption. It has no obligation to be fair to you. It never has been, and it never will be." He then tapped the right side of the shield, where the iron was scarred and dented from actual battlefield blows. "On this side is your internal citadel," the old prefect whispered, his voice carrying the weight of a mountain. "Your choices, your response to adversity, your commitment to justice, and your refusal to let your own character be corrupted by the ugliness of others. This is the only space where you possess absolute sovereignty. When you choose to feel bitter, when you scream that life is unfair, you are allowing the corruption on the left side of the shield to break through the iron and destroy the virtue on the right side. You are letting Gaius win twice. First, he took your land, and now you are letting him take your peace of mind. Rusticus leaned over the shield, his face a mask of absolute structure. Every time the world treats you unfairly, apply the clinical knife of reason. Look at the injury and say to your soul, the emperor's decision is an external event. It can take my gold, it can take my rank, but it cannot force me to act with cowardice or malice. If your mind remains clean and unshakable, then the injustice has failed to touch you. It has simply bounced off your armor like a wooden spear against an iron wall.
Chapter 4. The Battle of the Registry.
3 weeks later, the shadow became flesh. The political tides of Rome shifted with a violent, catastrophic speed. The old chief senator was assassinated in his bed, and a new faction seized control of the registry. Gaius, the young patrician who had been awarded Lucius's triumph, was suddenly branded a traitor to the state. His lands were confiscated, his fine villa was burned by an angry mob, and he was forced to flee into the slums of the city, hunted by the night watchman like a rabid dog. By midnight, the chaos had reached the outer gates of the Praetorian barracks. A heavy guard detachment had captured Gaius near the riverbank, dragging him through the mud into the central courtyard. He was shivering, his expensive silk tunic torn to shreds, his face covered in bruises and dirt. The soldiers gathered around him in a circle, their torches flickering wildly against the dark stone walls. Many of these men had fought under Lucius. They knew how Gaius had stolen their triumph, and their eyes carried the dangerous, volatile heat of revenge. Look at the great conqueror now. A young legionary laughed, raising his iron spear point toward Gaius's chest. Where is your golden chariot tonight, patrician? Let's drop him into the tiger pits before the magistrate arrives. It is exactly what he deserves for what he did to our centurion. Gaius collapsed onto his knees in the mud, weeping hysterically, looking at the sharp iron weapons around him in absolute terror. Lucius marched into the center of the courtyard, his heavy red cloak billowing against the wind. The crowd of soldiers went silent, stepping back to let their leader pass, waiting for him to deliver the final, brutal blow of poetic justice. For a split second, the old animal instinct, the desire to see the wrongdoer crushed, the satisfaction of seeing a thief pay for his arrogance tried to storm Lucius's mind. He looked down at the pathetic creature shivering in the dirt. He remembered his 30 dead men. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. But Lucius looked at the vertical line on his shield in his mind. He remembered Rusticus's clinical words. The world has no contract of fairness. The best revenge is to remain unlike him. He closed his eyes and took a deep, steady breath of the cold night air, forcing his mind to step back from the edge of the cliff. He dropped the narrative of his old resentment and focused entirely on the fact the man is a prisoner. The law must decide his fate. My duty is to maintain order. The red fog of vengeance evaporated, leaving an absolute glacial clarity. "Lower your spears," Lucius commanded, his voice cutting through the noise of the torches like an iron bar snapping in half. It was not a shout, it was a statement of pure structure. The soldiers froze, looking at their centurion in absolute confusion. But centurion, the young legionary protested, his face tight. He stole our land. He insulted your honor. This is our chance to give him true justice. The mob in the street gives justice with a club. soldier," Lucius said, his eyes locking onto the young man's wild gaze with an unshakable weight. "A Roman soldier gives justice through the law. If we butcher a defenseless prisoner in the dark simply because he was a thief yesterday, we are proving that we are no different from the criminals we fight on the border. We do not maintain our honor because Gaius deserves it. We maintain our honor because we deserve it. Place him in the secure holding cell, guard him until the morning court meets, and let no man touch a single hair on his head. Now move."
Chapter 5. The Unshakable Citadel.
The courtyard cleared in a matter of minutes. Gaius was led away to the secure tower, still shaking but safe from the mob, looking back at Lucius with a mixture of profound shock and unpayable gratitude. Lucius walked back into his private barracks. Rusticus was sitting by the small hearth, slowly stoking the coals with an iron poker. He looked up as the centurion entered, noting the absolute absence of that frantic, restless anger that had defined the young man weeks ago. "The prisoner is secure, Rusticus," Lucius said quietly, sitting down on his wooden bench and taking up his cloth to clean his greaves. "Yes," Rusticus smiled faintly, a deep glint of pride in his old eyes. "And tell me, centurion, do you still feel that the universe is a chaotic slaughterhouse because your land is gone?" "The land was never mine, prefect," Lucius replied, looking at his own steady palms, which were completely free of the stain of blind vengeance. "Gaius spent his life chasing a shadow, and tonight that shadow swallowed him whole. If I had allowed my anger to dictate my choice tonight, I would have become a prisoner of his corruption, just to satisfy a moment of spite. The emperor took my gold, the Senate took my triumph, but tonight I realized that they never had the power to touch my soul. I am a centurion of Rome, and my virtue is the only empire I need to defend." "Because you finally understood the scale," Rusticus said, his voice deep and full of an unshakable pride. "When you stop expecting the external world to be a marketplace of fairness and start treating every act of injustice as a test of your own internal fortitude, you become invincible. The world can bring you corruption, betrayal, and broken promises, but your character remains an unbreakable wall of stone. When you are offended at any man's fault, turn immediately to yourself and reflect on your own errors. By doing this, you will soon forget your anger and realize that he is acting under compulsion." Lucius took a deep, clean breath of the morning air as the first light of dawn began to paint the stone walls of the barracks in a brilliant, golden silver. The world was still flawed, the Senate was still corrupt, and his 30 brothers were still gone. But as he buckled his iron breastplate to meet the new day, he knew he was finally unshakable. Most of us spend our lives trapped in the prison of resentment and the feeling of being wronged. When someone betrays our trust, when a corrupt colleague gets the promotion we earned, or when life hits us with a sudden, unfair disaster, we instantly explode with anger, asking the universe, "Why me? Why is life so unfair?" We let the external ugliness of the world dictate our internal light, turning ourselves into bitter victims who have surrendered their power. But a Stoic knows that the universe does not operate on a human contract of fairness. The next time you find yourself face to face with an injustice, stop. Do not let the corruption cross the walls of your mind. Remember the iron shield of Rome. Look at the injustice, realize that it belongs entirely to the external realm of fate, and ask your sovereign soul, what is my duty in this hour? Remain a man of honor when everyone else is a thief. Remain a person of structure when the world is chaotic. The best revenge against a corrupt world is to remain completely unshakable. This is Neo-Aurelium, transmission on the ultimate victory over injustice. Stay unshakable. Take care of yourself.